Hi, and welcome to Alive with Chronic Illness, a podcast dedicated to exploring what it's like to live with and not in spite of chronic illness. Today I'm joined by my sister Melissa to chat about some of our favourite reads. I've always been passionate about reading, and it can be a very accessible activity, taking many forms, whether that's written text, audio, or braille. I'm really excited to introduce you all to my sister, who I managed to rope into creating this episode with me. Thank you so much for coming on today, Melissa.
Thank you for having me on. I hope I do you proud.
I'm sure you will. I guess we're just going to get straight into it and chat about a book that we've both read.
Yes.
So, the first book we are going to chat about today is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. We've just gotten through autumn when we're recording this, so it's
hmm
probably going to be in December by the time this comes out. But I think it was a really good, perfect autumnal read.
It really had, to encompass the entire vibe of the pumpkin spice cafe, it really put its niche in autumn, and I think it did take off this year. I've seen it in the local supermarkets as well as the bookshops is really bigly promoted.
And to give a little bit of a context on what the book's about, it may be obvious in the title, but there could be a pumpkin spice cafe in it. But it is a good little feel good small town read with a bit of romance in. So we follow our main character, Deanie, who takes over her aunt's pumpkin spice cafe in the small town of Dream Harbor. I don't want to give too much away because I feel like there's a lot that happens so quick in this book. So normally I'd be
Yeah.
like, the beginning starts like this, but the beginning like, literally sets you
Yeah.
up. But I do love that. I love how it's got that fast pace.
Yes, it feels very much like a film. If I had to market it, I would say it's a Hallmark autumn film, but Hallmark with spice,
Yeah, I like that spicy hallmark.
spicy Hallmark.
Mm, it
Why
is
is
good.
that not more of a thing?
I know. I have to get onto them after this.
hmm
But yes, no, I think it is good. I like that it kind of gets into the storyline. I love a book that just gets to the point. I think that the author did really well at being able to world build while still having quite a fast moving plot.
Yes, yes, because the story itself is a massive setup as well for future books in Dream Harbor. She's done an incredible job at introducing us to the locals, to the setting, while also moving the story along so it doesn't feel like we're spending three chapters doing nothing and not really having any progression.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't read any of the other books in this series yet, but I think you've read the second one.
I've read the second and the third now. The third just
Ah,
came out. So that's the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore and the Christmas Tree Farm. Both very good, both very different, but
okay.
very in keeping with her vibe. The characters I feel are more different in two and three than the first one. The first one is definitely the most accessible character wise.
Okay, that's good to know. I look forward to reading those. They are on my to read list actually. I want to try and get into some more seasonal reads this year, trying to mark the passing of time with books.
It's a good way to mark the passing of time.
So, chatting about like what happens in the book, without giving
Mhm.
too much away. I've got the blurb up here because I don't want to give too much away that people wouldn't necessarily know unless they'd
Yes.
already. So, what I quite loved about this kind of goes in really well with what you were saying about the Hallmark vibe, is she's left her job to go and live in a small town, and there she meets a local farmer. And he's a big fan of avoiding Dream Harbor's gossip at all costs. So he's quite, quiet, keeps himself to himself. And I think we all get a feeling for where this might go in the book. I mean,
Mm.
why would she meet a small town farm? I mean, what purpose could that have? Where could that lead? So it's clearly a romance. Is that there is it's I would say that although there is a lot of other deep relationships in the book,
Yes.
the romance is very much the focus and most developed. Like,
Yes.
and that
It's very much to its core a romance book. It doesn't neglect the other relationships, but romance is its core purpose as a story.
yeah, and I think that fits. I think it works really, really well for this one. And I think also from this concept of like following the storyline, for me, sometimes there's a lot of different things going on, loads of different plots. It can be a bit exhausting to keep up with them all. So actually having quite a clear sort of like plot line was good for me. So I really liked that, and I liked how that developed throughout the book and how the author explored those different relationships and that dynamic of moving to a new town, having to try and fit into a really close-knit community and what that's like. And I think that particularly was captured so well because although she becomes an essential part of the community because of the cafe that she runs, this is something that a lot of people use. It's something that people, it's part of their daily routine. So all of a sudden she is sort of catapulted into their day to day, but that doesn't mean that she's automatically accepted into the day to day. And I think the exploration of how you can be part of a community all of a sudden, even in quite a prominent way, but you still need to adapt and get to know people and grow yourself within that community and adapt to that space. I really liked that about the book and the way it explored that element of
I
life.
completely agree with you. It was very much her story. Like, he did have a lot of time and characterization, and he did have his story too. But it very much felt like it was a deep story about this woman who was coming to this town. And there is a reason for that. I'll let you discover that in the story. But she is essentially restarting her entire life again. And I think anyone can relate to the fear and the overwhelming feelings of being uprooted into a new space, not really knowing what to do with yourself, but also ultimately sort of taking this plunge and having to try and learn the new ways of the town folk and trying to integrate yourself in. I think anyone can relate to that.
Yeah, and it's like applicable to so many different things on so many different levels. And that's what I quite like when it's a book that you can relate to, regardless. Like even if you've not moved to a small town, we've all had life-changing experiences where maybe we've got a new job and we've had to get used to being around different people, meet different people. And it really captures that happens it happens throughout our lives over and over again. Things are always changing and developing. And I think this book is a good reflection of that and how things can develop in different ways for the better, for the worse, that let you find out when you read it. But I definitely think this one, and I'm assuming this is intentional, reminded me quite a lot of Gilmore Girls and the
Yes.
setting and that small town, cozy vibe.
It was giving Gilmore Girls, and I haven't watched Gilmore Girls. I know.
Yeah,
But even I was like, this feels Gilmore Girls. I can feel the vibe.
yeah, and that I mean, to be fair, that was a big reason why I was like, oh, I want to read that because I'd heard that it was like Gilmore Girls. So I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely read that one. So I was thinking we could go through and have a chat about what kind of snack we would want to have while we were reading these books, what snack the book reminded us of. But I
Ooh.
honestly feel like pumpkin spice latte is kind of what it's giving, which is, I
It
mean, a little bit
it's
of
it's giving, but like
a
if you were like walking into the pumpkin spice cafe and you had your pumpkin spice latte, but then you needed a snack to go with it,
Mm,
I think I would probably go for a cookie, like a
okay.
classic warm chocolate chip cookie, maybe with some cinnamon.
Oh, cinnamon cookie. I like that.
How about you?
I think, hmm, it's a very important questions, the food ones. I need to
It's
make sure
very
I take my
important.
time with it.
It's a make or break question.
It absolutely is.
Friendships can end on this.
I feel I'm just trying to think of like what I like in the autumn. Cookies a good one, but I think I'd like something maybe like a pecan twist or something like that. Something warm.
Ooh.
Something
Ooh.
that, well, to be fair, I say something I wouldn't have the other times of the year, but I mean, pastries are good all year round. I don't, when it comes to eating foods in certain seasons, I don't discriminate when it comes to food.
No.
Any time of the year.
Yeah, any time
Um,
of the year. But like if
I,
you're looking for like typically seasonal, I do think if you don't have an apple pie in autumn
oh, yeah.
with a little bit of custard or cream,
Mm,
some people don't
cinnamon
like
apple
custard.
pie.
Apple pie is good
Mm, yeah. With some cinnamon
with some cinnamon.
or some pumpkin.
Was it
Pumpkin,
pumpkin?
pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin spice latte
We
and pumpkin
totally
pie.
missed
Why
that.
not? Go all out. Yeah. That would have been easy. We could have just gone with that one.
Yeah. We let everyone down there.
So I guess we're going to move on to the next pick. So what we're doing today is a mixture of a couple of books that we've both read, so we can chat about them a bit, and then a couple of books that one of us has read, but the other one might not have.
So my first pick is The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. This is not a book Elizabeth has read, but I'm hoping it is one that, because of our shared childhood past, she can relate to. So it kind of is what the title says. It is kind of a Victorian slash Regency. Think Bridgerton, Pride and Prejudice, that kind of imagery and that
Hmm.
kind of language, but it's written in a modern, very easy way for people to read. And it's essentially this story about this girl called Cecilia Bassingthwaighte. And she is part of the Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels, which are a bunch of women who are completely outside of the societal norms of the time. They have flying houses, which they regularly fire cannons at each other's houses. It's kind of like think house pirates.
Okay,
So their
yeah.
houses actually can fly, and they fight in these houses, but they're all friends, but they are always like trying to kill each other or trying to attack one another. But it's all in good jest. Like there's never necessarily the threat of death, although there is a lot of violence. It all seems to sort of be like, oh, I almost poisoned you, Petunia. Very sort of tongue in cheek. And they all sort of cumulate in this story where Cecilia, she's been very protected her whole life because reasons that I will not say, but she gets propelled on this journey. And of course, there is a handsome scoundrel called Ned, because there has to be a handsome scoundrel called Ned. And he sort of gets interwoven with his part of the story, and it's very much a intersection. He's got his bit that he's doing, which you sort of think there's something else going on, but you don't know until we're given more from that point of view. And the stories intersect and they all cumulate together to come to this bit where you're like, ah, that makes more sense now. It's absolutely hilarious, action packed, drama filled, witty, fantastical fun. I will also say it isn't for children. It reads like a whimsical childhood novel, but with adult contents. This is a very for adult story. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's particularly graphic violence either, but they do reference violence.
Oh, it sounds really good. And where you were describing it, like just a little bit of, playful violence, just a bit of sounds to me like just any normal sibling, healthy sibling relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, who hasn't thrown a knife at their tea companion?
Well, I suppose actually when you put it that way.
As I can't remember the last time we did that with afternoon tea.
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds good. No, it sounds really good. And I love the title. I love Wisteria. Very beautiful.
It was part of the reason I picked it up to begin with. The cover was gorgeous, and India Holton, the writer, she's done an incredible job. And there are other books in the series. They can be read standalone, but they do interweave in a way where if you've read the previous one in order, you do get more from the story.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. No, that sounds really good. And actually, that's a good point you picked up on there because I think I know we're not supposed to judge a book by a cover, but we absolutely do.
We do, we do.
Yeah.
You can't help it sometimes. I think it's very important in marketing for a good cover.
Yeah, and I think it really captures the feel of the
Yes,
book. And so you've got an idea of what it's going to be like before you even start reading it.
completely agree with you. It If you don't market your book correctly and the cover doesn't make the story noticed, you're not really going to know what you're picking up.
Yeah, that's true. And to be fair, like I tend to like pick the cover and then I read the blurb. And if I like the blurb, I'm like, okay, I'll read it. Unless the cover's
Yeah.
like amazing, in which case sometimes I might just read it anyway. But this sounds terrible. But look at that cover. So,
So it looks so pretty on the shelf.
so one I've read this year and I really enjoyed was A Country Village Allotment by Kathy Lake. This was again like sinfully. I saw the cover, it's like my local library, and thought, oh, that sounds quite good. And I'm pretty sure I read this either spring, summer, and I wanted something that captured nature. and allotment sounded good. I always find interesting how we interpret things and how like our experience of reading a book is so heavily shaped by our subjective experience, literally by that. Because I was reading the blurb for this book to talk about it, and then I realized that my interpretation, how I remember the book versus how it's advertised, are really different things. But it is a really interesting book. I really enjoyed it. It is a cozy read that kind of explores some more challenging themes. And again, it has the theme of starting over,
Mm.
which I think we'd already touched on a lot here. And I just obviously love a good start over story. So it starts off by following Liz, who finds out that her partner is having an affair, and this basically turns her entire world upside down. So she moves to go and stay with her sister in Little Bramble, and she makes two really close friends there, Zelda and Mia. And I think that, again, it is one of those stories where it explores the idea of like things not going to plan. She had this whole idea of what her life would be like. She was going to marry this man, they were going to have a whole life together, and she had a life in the community she was in. And all of a sudden, in literally a moment, that all changed. And she then travels and goes to reinvent herself and find a different way and a different life. What really struck out to me was the depth of the female friendships in this book. I loved that was there was really a very nurturing collective in the way they built those and the way that she went to stay with her sister who supported her. And then she made two close female friends who also supported her and they supported each other. And they built this community within themselves. And the reason I sort of pointed out that it's interesting reading the blurb is because I would have said that she was the main character, but from reading the blurb, I'm now worried. I think I need to read. I need to reread and like see if I've accidentally overlooked some other characters here because I felt like it was very much driven around her narrative and her life. And the other characters all have, I don't want to give too much away, but they all have very intricate, really interesting, important stories that lead in to that closeness and to that companionship, and into the relationships they form. And I think that's what is particularly captivating about it as a book, that it's, in a sense, a kind of what I would define as a cozy read, but it also acknowledges the richness of life and that we can have this idea of like cozy village living, and we can also have things that are difficult. We can have both. Like life can be really beautiful and life can be really, really hard at the same time. And I think that was captured particularly well in this, in how those nuances of existence coexist. And that's for me, like, why it was quite interesting when we chatted about making this episode, because I was like, gosh, what I think's a cozy read is probably very different to what other people think are, or like even between us, we probably think of different things as cozy. So we didn't end up going with the cozy theme because I realized that we'd probably end up with different variations of what that looks like. Because that's cozy for me. I don't get me wrong, I love a good feel good book, but sometimes when I read a book where someone's life is just too perfect,
Mm.
I just think, oh no, that's just too good. No, I need a little bit of something else in there. Let's just have a little bit of
A little bit of
a
mess.
life. I want to feel that it's relatable. I want to feel like I can
Mm.
relate and engage by that.
I think some of the best books have characters that feel lived, not the
Mm,
ones that are painted as this perfect portrait, but the ones that are a little bit messy, the ones that you sort of go, oh, yes, I would make that mistake too, or oh, goodness me, she's tumbled out of bed, her hair's a mess. And I do that because it's a human action. And when you read a book and everything's too perfect, too crisp, and too crystal clean, I think it's really easy to feel this disconnect from the
mm.
story as to when you see those tiny little human moments.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely it. And I think the idea of like, I do like a good fantasy escapism novel, but if it's too far from reality, I think I struggle with that. And when I think of a cozy book, it tends to be ones that can some way mimic reality. And I guess it's about what I find cozy. So
Yeah,
I live in a small area. I live in a village and I enjoy living in a quiet village. But someone else idea of cozy, it could be in the middle of a city when they're surrounded by people all the time.
exactly.
And there's that community around them.
Or they might like horror, or
Yeah. Cozy
to some
horror would be an
people.
interesting one.
I mean, I guess some people like to
Yeah.
be scared. Someone else's idea of cozy might be a completely far off reaching idea that we haven't even conceived yet. It's a very interpretive thing, cozy. Like, what does cozy mean to you? I guess could be an entire discussion and conversation with anyone, because I bet you if you stop 10 people on the street and ask them, they'd all give you a different answer.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the same with everything, like the way we interpret books, the way we interpret images is obviously very, very subjective. But yeah, that was what I quite liked about that one anyway. Those
It sounds
rich
good.
female friendships and community. And I don't think we did this one for your one. We were doing the food theme and then we stopped. And I think, oh, I don't know. What does it remind? It reminds me of a Sunday roast dinner with fresh
Ooh.
vegetables from the allotment. Will not take any less.
Ooh.
They've got to be from the allotment. They've got to be fresh. In
Love
my
it.
fantasy roast dinner, that's how it is. It's good like that.
I
Um,
will come over for that roast dinner.
mm,
That sounds delicious. Allotment veg only.
yes, and I love that I thought like roast dinner when this is literally like a spring summer read for me. But I think that, it's on brand for me. Like I said, do not discriminate when it comes to food. There, no time of
Exactly.
year. It doesn't, food is forever.
Food is forever, and a roast dinner can be had any time of year.
Yes, and it should be.
It should be.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our next read now, which is a shared read, actually. Yeah, so we're going to go on to The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Madana. I'm trying to think of when I read this. I feel like this was the beginning of the year, so it was like a wintry read for me. How about you? When did you read this
I
one?
think mine was around the beginning of the year as well. I remember you'd recommended it actually, I think. So you might have just started reading it. And it was one of those books where anything with a witch in the story, I love. So when you said, "Oh, she's a witch," immediately went to the top of my TBR.
Yeah, I think it was that I read it and then recommended it to you, then we both chatted about it afterwards. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed this one. I liked it. And I think it was quite trying to think when this came out. It was in 2022. So it's been out quite a while before the time I actually read it. So I don't actually remember
Hmm.
how I ended up coming across this one. But the book follows our main character, Mika Moon, who is a witch, in a world where witches aren't widely known or spoken about. So it's very much a secret that they can't really share with people. It has to be kept, well, a secret. Thus the very secret society element of it. And what she does is she creates like videos for an online account of her being a witch, but most people think that it's not real, and that it's just for fun. Although there's a little bit of worry from her peers also in the very secret society that someone might figure out that she is actually a witch.
Yes. They're a little bit concerned that her exposure
Hmm.
might be seen by someone who's maybe not as skeptic.
Yes, absolutely. So she ends up actually, I think if I remember rightly, and this shows like my brain fog here. So if anyone's listening and I start talking about a book and you've read this and you think that she's not even talking about the same book, probably. Um, she actually gets contacted through her online account about
Mhm.
teaching some younger witches, and that's interesting because obviously someone did notice, they could tell that she was a
Mhm.
witch. That's where the storyline goes from there. So she goes and travels and she stays in their home and she teaches them secretly because they're not supposed to all be together. And I don't want to give too much away here, but there is a bit of romance in this one.
Mhm.
And again, I think it was one where the plot, it just got straight to it. There was a bit of world building, but it was very much just getting to the storyline, which is my personal preference.
Yes.
And I quite like that you could get really engaged with the story right away.
Yes. I really liked this one because it was very different take on witches.
Yeah.
Without being too spoilery, the way that the author has built up this world of witches and the rules and the law around them, it's very unique. I haven't read any other book that I can think of in recent times that has kind of gone this heavily into a very intricate law system of rules and regulations for how the witches ecosystem works.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the author does a really good job at doing so and sort of explaining it in a way that it makes sense. So you can kind of follow the
Yes.
story, you can learn the dynamics behind it, And you can actually think, oh yeah, this makes sense. There's some books I've read before where there'll be like one rule, then there'd be another rule, and there's almost like a bit of a plot hole there. And it would
Hmm.
kind of knock that continuity a bit, but that didn't really happen for me in this one. And I
No,
really liked that about it.
you can almost like feel that the author has written down on a piece of paper, these are the rules. We are not straying outside of these lines.
Mm,
This is the Bible on the rules of this world. And she's kept to that, and she's done it in such a graceful way, because the story is could you could argue the story is quite an emotional one at the root, and she's done a really elegant job at explaining the entire story and doing it in a way where it draws the reader in, but it doesn't overwhelm them.
yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it. It's a solid, consistent basis that really adds to the story because it gives you an idea of what to expect. And every interaction with the book is molded based on the idea of how things should be or shouldn't be. And again, like it has that same theme of leaving one place, traveling to another place, like finding belonging that has been prevalent in a lot of the books we've talked about today. And I think that adds to it as well, especially because of the idea that witches shouldn't be close together. It has to be really heavily a secret. Finding belonging then in a world where that's what things are like, where you have to be a secret, and you
Mm.
can stray outside of that. And that could lead definitely to isolation. I really liked that kind of how they utilize that theme in such a powerful way because it was almost like a rule that you must stay isolated in some sense.
Mm. You have to starve yourself of connection.
Mm. And then and I think that fed really well into as the story develops and try not to give too much away here, but when she finds that belonging, how much she has to do to protect it and how important that it really captures. So once you've found your space, once you've found your people, how important that is, how important that space is to protect and how far people will go to protect that.
Yeah, it is a story that really puts a spotlight on how important that is to people. And once you find your people, you'll do anything for them.
Yeah. But back to our food theme,
Mm.
which is an interesting one, this one. I don't actually know. I'm struggling with this one, trying to think
Mm.
of like what I feel like it's a cup of tea book, but I feel like I need to say more than a cup of tea. Like it can't just be cup of tea. There must be more to this, but I definitely had a good few cup of teas while I was reading it, which actually might be biasing my opinion. Yeah,
I was
just a
going to
bit.
say a cup of tea with a clotted cream and jam scone. It's a
Yeah.
very afternoon tea kind of book.
And what goes first, the cream or the jam?
Do we really want to ignite that debate?
Yes.
I put the jam on the bot that on first on the bottom, and then I put the cream on top.
I do. I put the cream first and then the jam. No.
How did this happen? We grew up together.
Ugh. This is the whole nature
But
versus
wait, which
nurture
is
debate right
which? Is
now.
that Devon or Cornwall?
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
See, I always did the jam first because I thought that was the messy bit, and then the cream, you just sort of like layer it on.
I feel like for me, and actually, as I say this, I like this book reminds me of having a cup of tea and a marshmallow jam tea cake.
Ooh.
Because that's the vibes I'm getting. And then when you started speaking about the cream and stuff, for me, I think of it kind of like that tea cake. Like you'd have like the marshmallow and the jam. That's kind of how I see it. So that's why I like my clotted cream first with a little bit of jam. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like this does, nature versus nurture. Clearly, nature did not dictate. We were literally, well, and nurture. What happened?
I know we're gonna
What
have to
went
take this.
wrong?
We're gonna have to take this up with mum and dad. Be like, what happened?
Yeah, I have to find out what way mum has it.
I think she does it my way,
What about
and I think
dad?
dad does it my way as well.
Oh gosh, what happened to me when I was growing
What
up?
happened?
Where was I raised?
By people who like clotted cream on the bottom.
It seems like it. It seems like it. So we'll move on then to your next and final read.
Yes. So I have picked Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. That title might seem familiar to some people because it is the book that inspired the animated movie Howl's Moving Castle. The book and the movie are similar, but there are different entities. All the characters in the book didn't necessarily make the switch from book to movie, and they did cut and they did change characters. I'm obviously going to talk exclusively about the book today, but I did just want to quickly throw in that the movie, although different, is just as good, and if not a completely accurate tale, but it honors the book in a way which, if you enjoyed the book, you'll enjoy the movie, and the same as you enjoyed the movie, you will enjoy the book. So the book follows Sophie, and she's a hat maker in Ingri, I believe the land of Ingri, and she's quiet. She's moving through her day. She's getting on, and after a chance encounter with the Witch of the Waste, she finds herself cursed to be an old lady. So to break this curse, she goes to Hao, who is a dreadful wizard of the land, who's sort of being known as a womanizer, and he's up to no good, and he's all over the place. And in going to meet him, she comes across a demon who is linked to Hao, and the demon says, if you break my curse, I'll break your curse. And it's another story of magic and adventure and whimsy and another moving house. This one doesn't fly, but it does move. Just realizing there's a bit of theme here.
Yeah.
Lots of moving houses, but it's a story that at its core is a tale about a woman coming into her own
Mm.
and sort of almost not, I won't say growing a spine, but learning to stand up for herself, and maybe realizing she's more capable than she realizes.
Yeah, I love that. I love a good growth story. And I think it's so good. I know that, like, I think particularly as women, we're often taught not to be assertive, but I'm a big fan of saying what you mean and saying
Agreed.
it. Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good to have that kind of, it's not always easy and it depends. I think it's very much environment specific, but I
Mm-hmm.
definitely think there is this element of like having that kind of power to speak your truth. And I haven't actually read the book, obviously, but no, it sounds really good. I've seen little bits of the film. I've seen little bits of the film. So
It's
I really,
definitely different, but if you enjoyed even a fraction of the film, you will enjoy the book. It's appropriate for all ages. This one, it's very much you could read it to a child, and there's very minimal things to worry about in it at all. Maybe a little bit of action violence, but overall, you could read it to a child and have no problems.
brilliant. So what food does it remind you of?
Ooh. Well, the movie is actually very heavy on food. There's a lot of really pretty food scenes. I was going to say it reminds me of a hearty soup, like maybe a
Mm.
chicken and vegetable hearty soup. But like, if you want a bit of imagery there, I would say it's on like, do you remember like that old like copper pots that you put over the fires? It's kind of like a soup, but being done in one of those, like a big hearty soup, like you're about to feed the village. Big
Yes.
hearty soup. It's
Mm.
very comforting.
Yeah. No, I love that. Very powerful imagery there.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the last book today, and my last pick, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. I really, really enjoyed this book. I'm trying to think again, like when did I read this? What time of year? And I actually think it was the end of last year, actually, in December. And again, in keeping with a theme that I realized that you were saying that there is a theme within the books you chose, there's definitely a theme in the books I chose. So it follows the main character, Linus, who leads quite a quiet, solitary life. He lives with his cat, so it's him and his cat, and he works as a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. So his job is to keep an eye on the well-being of children who are in government-sanctioned orphanages. So that's how we start off, and it goes through what his life has been like. And although he's kind of like living his day to day, he's not living his best life. So again, he's going to go on a journey. He's going to, find himself. And I feel like the fact that all three books I thought these are my defining books for the last 12 months have been about that. I don't know what that says. I don't know if I found myself in the last 12 months. I have to check back in on that one and see. But yeah, so I loved it. I loved it, loved it. So he gets sent on an assignment to travel to one of the orphanages and to see what's going on. And the orphanages kind of almost function like schools. And there's a range of children there who are given support, and all these children have magical abilities. The caretaker who runs the orphanage has a little bit of a secret as well. And that's again like a theme that we chatted about with the Secret Society of Regular Witches. There's this idea of that Linus has to make a decision, and he's always done things by the book, to the rule, always. He has to make a decision where he can follow the book. He can follow the rules and do what he's supposed to do as per the book. Or he can make a different decision that's fueled not just by rules and regulations, but by his own moral compass. And that was the bit in the book that was so interesting and compelling for me, the exploration of that character. I think because of the kind of book it is, I didn't think for a second that he was going to turn around and not like follow his heart. I could definitely, I don't know, I feel like, which doesn't make it like, it didn't dampen the story for me, but it was like, you can't, I mean, imagine writing the book and then they just follow the rules and it's just, I don't even think that's a thing.
Go through
I
all of that.
Absolutely. You go through all of that, and then he's just like, no, actually, I'm shutting the orphanage down. No. But yeah, I liked it. I think it was a really interesting, again, way of capturing society's perceptions of things of people that are different, actually, and of things that fit with outside a specific mold, which again,
Mm.
I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of anything that challenges that mold. And obviously, we don't have well, you know, I don't think we have like witches and wizards wandering around in fantasies, but it's that kind of exploring things from a different perspective that I like about fantasy
Mm.
novels. Because I didn't used to read them. I used to be very heavy, like I can only read books that for me was like contemporary, that were based on life, that I felt like I could relate to in a very specific kind of sense.
Mhm.
But then I started to really get into fantasy more recently, actually. I think probably
Mm.
I maybe the last year is when I started reading more fantasy novels and enjoying the way that we can kind of play with different metaphors of life within fantasy and explore things that actually probably aren't that different day to day, but can be captured in a different way when we look at it from a more fairy tale or mystical lens. And I quite like that. And I think we are moving forward in terms of like the way that things are written. There used to potentially be a kind of way of thinking that fantasy books are mainly for maybe younger people. And
Hmm.
I think we're stepping away from that, stepping away from thinking we have to lose that kind of love of magic and fantasy and life. I think there's a real beautiful way that children look at the world in a very open, powerful narrative. I think it's almost like very beautiful to think about the world in terms of like when I was a kid. I remember looking back and thinking about all the different things I could do. Now from my like adult lens, I probably could never have done those. Like I wanted to be a mechanic at one point, a ballerina, astronaut. I think I watched too many Barbie movies, and I just thought, wow, oh, if Barbie can do it, why can't
Well, we
I?
can do it.
Yeah. But that kind of love for like escapism and fantasy and life and magic that we lose, and a lot of people still lose that as they grow up. I think that's something that is really important to be captured and cherished.
I agree. I think, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot more books that are encompassing the whimsy of childhood, but through a slightly more adult collection of characters. And it's like you said, you get older and you see the world more black and white than when you did when you were a child. It was like Technicolor as a child, but as you get older, the heaviness of reality settles in, and it's so easy to lose absolutely everything you dreamed and loved as a child. And I do think books are this incredible escapism. And anyone who takes the time to write a story and give people the opportunity to find this escapism again, especially if it takes them back to a childhood time where they were comfortable or happy or just enriched with laughter and adventure, they deserve a round of applause.
Yeah, I think books have this amazing power to transcend both time and situation and to transport the reader to something, because we often have things in our lives that are really difficult we're dealing with. And being able to delve into a good book and just escape that for a while is a kind of magic power that authors gift us with every day with the books that they write. And yeah, I don't think that can be underestimated.
No.
And with that in mind, the I'm trying to think now. So I feel like I picked this question like, oh, we should talk about foods. And now I'm just like, I don't actually know what food any of these books remind me of. It takes me a minute to like this is such a difficult one. I love that it's set on the seafront and this
Fish and
well set on the
chips.
sea and fish and chips. I honestly, it's a fish and chip book. I
The
mean, I
fish
would
and
recommend having
chips.
a greasy fish and chip while physically reading the book. That would be a bit of a recipe for
Audiobook.
disaster. Yeah, exactly. And this is what audiobooks were obviously invented for. So you could have your fish and chips and listen at the same time,
Exactly.
and nothing gets greasy because you're just listening to it. Yeah. It's a fish and chip book. I love it.
Fish
It's
and
good
chips.
with vinegar, salt.
Ooh,
Yeah.
the full
And
work.
and I think most people think of fish and chips and maybe they think like a nice warm summer's day, but I'm literally thinking like on the beach under like one of those lovely little storm shelters you get with it raining, it's raining, you've got your little coat on, you're waterproof. You're
So,
waterproof.
like the last time we had fish and chips on the seafront and it was just blowing a gale, but we were just like, we're doing it.
Yes, it was. And my hair was everywhere. And I was like, is that a bit of hair I've
Mouthful
just
of chips,
eaten?
lump of hair.
That's it. Yes, it was. They were really good fish and chips.
They
It was
were really
just
good fish and chips.
really, really bad weather. Well, it was a sunny day. It was just so windy, and
Yeah.
where the fish and chip shop was just like
Yeah, it was not protected. It was like bang smack on the seafront.
I think ice cream would have been worse though because
Oh my
hair in
God.
ice cream. Oh no.
Oh no, no, no. I don't want my Mr. Whippy with a bit of hair in it. No, thank you.
Oh gosh. No, absolutely. And I feel like it would have gone flying within a few seconds as well because it
Yeah.
was very intense. Like I think I was holding onto the plate at one point.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. Well, that concludes our reads for today's episodes. I hope you all enjoyed it, and thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on with me and chatting about books. It's been really fun.
Thank you for having me.
Check out the description for a list of books we talked about on today's episode. And as always, thanks for tuning in.